Ah, there you all are. So welcome everybody to the Northern Powerhouse Education, Employment and Skills Summit 2022. I'm Gill Morris and I'm going to chair and be, if you're allowed to say, master or mistress of ceremonies for today's summit. This is our third summit and we've been really been through it since we started in Leeds station. We've had the pandemic, we've had Brexit, and we now live in even more interesting times. We're absolutely delighted that we are here in home, I don't want to call it cinema, it's sort of like an arts complex. And before I sort of go any further, I just wanted to introduce you to Henry, who is the deputy at the moment. Some people will know Dave Moutry, who again is a really great champion of Manchester and the arts as well. But Henry, I just really wanted to thank you very much for your support at home, and maybe just to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Henry. I'm the very, very new Exec Director and Deputy CEO here at home. It's week 5, so this is as much a test of my induction skills as it is a welcome. We're delighted to be hosting the summit here. We are, if you haven't been to home before, we are an art centre, absolutely. We've got 5 cinema screens. This is the second biggest. We've got 2 theatre spaces. We've got a visual arts gallery. If you haven't checked it out, there's an exhibition on at the moment, the British Art Show, which we're doing in partnership with a host of other galleries across the city, and with this is interesting. This is interesting. Look at that. There we are. Incredibly loud or incredibly quiet. We've been open for 7 years. We've had 4 million visitors over that course of that 7 years. We've had 35,000 cinema screens. We've had nearly 2,000 theatre performances. And we've had, I think, 75 exhibitions, if I can remember correctly. This is the induction working. But all of that stopped, obviously, 2 and a bit years ago, and we're still trying to get back from that. And Brexit, cost of living crisis, the recruitment crisis that I'm sure everyone is feeling across the sectors, but particularly in the arts sector, technical staff, development staff, fundraising staff, and front of house hospitality staff, it's just nigh on impossible to recruit for those positions at the moment, which is causing massive knock-on effects for the arts sector particularly, but across hospitality, I know. We have an amazing creative development team here. We have an amazing talent development team. So young people are at the very centre of what we do, and will continue to be as we go into the next, hopefully, round of Arts Council funding from next year onwards. I will hand back to Jill that in terms of housekeeping, there are no scheduled fire alarm drills or tests. So if the fire alarm does go, please do assume it's the real thing. And just make your way out of either of these exits and follow our amazing staff who will lead you to safety. And toilets are, again, just straight back through these doors. I think everyone's got the schedule, so everyone knows when there are lunch breaks, etc., etc. But I will hand you back to Jill. Thank you so much for coming to home. And if you have a chance to, please explore the building. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Big round of applause, I think, for Henry. You're doing very well in your new job, I'm sure, and a great asset to the North. I think what we will do today is often reflect actually about very much the huge potential that we have in the Northern Powerhouse, how the people in this room, really need to join together and collaborate and actually demonstrate, the strength of and its potential to do more. We're very lucky in the North because we have devolved power in parts, and if we are going to look at the government's meaningful devolution and the levelling up and regeneration bill promises, we can see great potential, certainly in Greater Manchester, which has been given trailblazer status. So I'm just sort of wanting to talk about how we bridge the gaps. We've talked a little bit, I want to talk a lot about Brexit and the pandemic, what it means for employment, education and skills. I mean, we really are living in unprecedented times. And I know I've been saying that for the last 3 years or 4 years, and probably since before not breakfast, before Brexit too. So today we've got a really exciting program. We're looking at the state of the economy, but ultimately throughout everything, we're looking at the how do we bridge the gaps post-pandemic, post-Brexit, and actually post-ESF in terms of our prosperity. I think everybody, again, will have their own COVID or pandemic story or experience, whether you're an employer, big business, or just somebody or an employee. But we need to think about the North's opportunity, how we actually drive that talent, how we drive infrastructure and growth. We also have, of course, at the same time, a climate emergency, and we need to scale up transition to net zero by 2050 or sooner. No one knows what the impact of these crises will be on the North's education, employment, skills, and our future growth potential. But we do know that there will be gaps in the North's opportunities and potential prosperity. I think it's very interesting that we have this sort of record, record employment and record job vacancies. It's incredible, but we also know that before the pandemic, in certain sectors, and before Brexit, we knew there were potential in social care, for example, in green jobs, green skills. What kind of jobs do we need for the next generation? So my big thing really is even before the pandemic, cost of living crisis, Brexit, and all of these challenges, economic and social, these regional disparities and inequalities across the Northern Powerhouse existed. So as we come out, we need to think about how we're going to deliver. And I think it's a big headache for Michael Gove. How are we going to deliver? He's already said it's going to be really tough. There's a cost of living crisis. So what we've got across the North, I think, is pockets of competition, which will generate, saying we want that, but also we've got a lack of connectivity. So it's really hard to get that economy driving. And I think we've got a huge debate today to do that. So I think we can all look back in maybe even next year, the year on, but I don't think at the moment we actually know what the gaps, what it means to the economy and how the productivity is low. We need to make sure that whether you are tomorrow's generation or people in this room, that we have a really good education, employment and skills and job market, which actually drives that prosperity and growth. I believe, and always have done, because I'm a proud Northerner originally. I know I don't sound like one, but we can do it. We just need the power and the collaboration, working together to do that. So we need to tackle that those prevailing inequalities in the North, cities, regions, and towns. So that's enough of me on my soapbox, and you'll probably hear more of me. As I say, we've got a really extraordinary lineup. You've had Henry already, and we'll go. I mean, this particular sort of day is we're really looking in the context of the cost of living crisis, which I've talked about, is how can the North bridge those gaps in education, employment, skills left behind by the pandemic and Brexit, and level up. Now, there's somebody who's been a real stalwart, big friend, and is the deputy director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. That's Lord Jim O'Neill, a proud Mancunian and Manchester United fan, amongst other things. I can tell you more. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately for his son is getting married, and so therefore he's not with us, but he didn't want to miss this. So I'm going, and what Jim does is really just better than I do, is set the context of where we are. And as you know, he's thought-provoking. So we're really pleased that he gave us the time to give us this message. So over to Jim.
So good morning. My first task is to apologise that you are seeing me on a video and not here in person. This is one of the most important events that I like to participate in because it relates real core human issues, especially skills and education, to both the challenges and the opportunities of the North. But I think I got a vaguely legitimate excuse. Miraculously, our son is getting married the day after you see me doing this. Let me try and sum up my sort of views of current state of play in 6 different ways, hopefully quite briefly. So I would like to break down my comments into 6 broad areas, so I'll try to be brief as possible. The first one is the state of the world in which the North lives. Because obviously the North is not an island that is not uninfluenceable by what's going on in the rest of the world. And unfortunately, the challenges seem to never stop coming. And obviously the huge rise in food and energy prices coming as a result of the dreadful Russian invasion of Ukraine is adding to already some of the greater challenges brought about for many of society's less well-off people as a result of COVID. And so, as I think Michael Gove himself said publicly recently, that if levelling up was tough to deliver before, it's even harder now. And that is the reality. And quite how the world economy plays out the next few months is of huge uncertainty. I'm somebody that's studied it for 40 years and I'm not quite sure which way it's going to do. But in the spirit of things I've said before, never let a crisis go to waste. And we will get the other side of whatever this crisis we're going through will end up being. Second thing in that regard, on so-called levelling up, in particular, where the North sits. I often sit around sort of trying to fathom out in my own head, how serious is this current government about levelling up? Which of course is a cousin of asking how serious was this and its predecessor governments about the Northern Powerhouse when the phrase levelling up hadn't even been brought in. And to some degree, I have 3 parts of answering that before I get into the other 4 points of substance. The first one is, I don't know, and I'm not sure they do. Second one is, because the sort of genie is out of the bottle, which started with the whole Northern Powerhouse agenda, what is it now, 8 years back? I don't think whichever government of the day can afford to put the genie back in the bottle again, because whatever it's called, and as we see with what's gone on in the complicated local politics for the past few years, people's expectations about government policy and what it can deliver have been raised. And this government, which benefits from the so-called red wall seats, has to at least try to deal with some of these issues. And in that sense, I have to say, with a possible exception of education, the much delayed white paper on levelling up was one of the more substantive things I've seen from this government. All 300 pages of it if you bought for one weekend. But I think as a sort of framework for what you might do on levelling up outside of education, you know, it's kind of like the PhD thesis of what you would do. So there is focus there. And I think my last 4 points about what do we need to do and where does the North need to help itself on all this stuff. And the first thing I would always start with, you won't be surprised to hear me say, is devolution. I think the genie on devolution was opened 8 years back. And actually, surprisingly in a way, what this white paper says about devolution is probably the most substantive I've seen for a few years from this government in its various shapes and disguises. And so for all different parts of the North that have not yet got onto the Devo journey with your elected mayor and a credible ask of trying to make your place better with more local power, I think the moment is here for you to try and get more. And I observe that we're slowly starting to get momentum on some of the things where there were roadblocks for quite a few years. And so that part I am pretty pleased about, but keep pushing. And I'll come back to touch on this because as it relates to the education space, I think a small window of opportunity has opened up. The second thing that relates to education and skills, another thing I think this government is focused on is something which I am now personally heavily involved in. Some of you probably know I became chair of a new body called Northern Gritstone, which is based around investing in startups coming out of Northern universities. And I can tell you, because of the amount of attention I get from government people about trying to make sure we can raise the money and get going, it is something that there is pretty serious intellectual interest in, which will last beyond whether it's just a government of now. And it's really important to try to create this virtuous circle of having more great ideas coming out of Northern universities, ended up with getting the right amount of money supporting it, and ultimately creating really good value-added jobs in key places around the north. Which takes me to the third thing, which is the broader virtuous circle of the interface between education, skills, jobs, opportunities. And I always personally think in this regard, COVID has already been a crisis that we shouldn't let go to waste. The whole issue of flexible working has unleashed many debates, but it's certainly unleashed this awareness that not everybody has to get on by being in the centre of London in an office every day. And it's allowing people to think more sensibly about their own personal space, how much and where they want to live, and commute more flexibly and so on. And I think this does open up all sorts of ideas for business to consider locating in other places where it might be cheaper. And it also allows employees to be more flexible. And I think this is an important thing for people in the north to think about where they can help themselves, either as employers or as mayors or as local councils, to help people get in. Let me finish with a few comments about education. I said that I thought the education white paper was, sorry, the overall levelling up white paper was pretty good, apart from education. The Department of Education has been the most centralised department that I've come across in my decade now long experience of education and Northern Powerhouse matters. And we need to use the devolution opportunity and the levelling up white paper, and crucially, the fact that the government has now identified 55 designated areas as so-called education investment areas and pushed them on two things. One is whether you can create a multi-academy trust as a local authority, and I've been led to believe that you can. So those local authorities around the north that think they understand the nature of the challenge better than the central government people in Whitehall, here is a chance that wasn't there a few months ago for you to go for what you want. And secondly, linked to many of the specific things I'm involved in, including my ongoing involvement with SHINE, Support and Help in Education, that sits in Leeds and is focused on trying to help educational attainment for the most disadvantaged. We are right in the middle of all of this. And I think Steve Rotherham, who's going to be with you today, the wonderful mayor of Liverpool City Region, has got some of his people in various parts of Liverpool involved in a project with the Steve Morgan Foundation and SHINE and some others on really trying to go to tricky places and make a difference. And I think there is a possibility for us across the north to try to push the government to include these kind of initiatives as part of the devolution agenda, which will give back more responsibility and energy to all you people in the room and people that are there elsewhere that are going to help you along this exciting journey to deliver the north in all its great potential. So again, sorry I can't be with you. Thanks for including me. See you soon.
So good stuff from Jim O'Neill there, and I think the word there is really around potential. we've got the Minister coming, as you know, Minister for Skills, Alex Burkhardt, later, and Anne Longfield will be chairing that session. So the structure of the day is very much that we look at the sort of the economy, we look at the state we are in, which is there we are, and then we're going to have this panel session just now, which I'll call up people in a second, and this is really bridging the growth gap session, and we've got a great lineup of leaders. One of the great leaders on this debate, and you know, is actually really gutted that she can't be here, is Baroness Judith. She's former leader of Leeds City Council, and again hosted the first NPEESS conference, which was overlooking Leeds Station. But today she's actually being sort of now she's been ennobled. She's in the other place, as they call it. So just to introduce this sort of this session on the leaders panel, I'm going to again beam her in from the Whip's office in the House of Lords. So there we go.
Firstly, can I say how sorry I am not to be with you in person. It was a great privilege to address the conference the last time around. The question posed is immense, and to be fair, no one really has the answers. At least we're having the debate, the discussions, but I think with any conversations around prosperity at a local level, and of course, we know we can't just say the whole of the North is facing these problems. We know within very small communities there are huge disparities, and these are issues that we need to address. What I will say is until we get further progress on devolution, particularly around the skills agenda, we're not going to address the problems that are facing us. What we know from the growth deal, from Leeds City Region, for example, going back some years now, but when we had control of the resource and the ability to put together the local partnerships, working with young people, working with employers, working with education providers, we outperformed the national programmes almost by double. These are the principles that we need to get woven into the tapestry and really get at the forefront. There are so many opportunities, greening the economy, recognizing that we just don't have the skills that we need to really achieve our full potential. But there are some serious questions about the levelling up agenda. And basically, we're going into all of the debate without actually having had a proper national evaluation in the past of what works. And I think we need to argue very, very clearly that we need to have a much greater understanding of where resource needs to be targeted, how it can be best used by local partners, and who ultimately has control over the spend at a very local level, in my view. Children and young people have suffered disproportionately as a result of COVID, as a result of all the shocks that are coming forward in the state of the economy. So there's enormous amount to be concerned about, but we have to be optimistic. And my repeated mantra about working in the North is that the North has so much to offer, so much to contribute. And if we can get the economy in the North working at full potential, then the benefit will spread across the whole country. So an enormous task ahead of us. Some very clear ideas coming through the levelling up debate. And I know that you'll focus on those today and hopefully come up with some of the answers that we need to take forward in the work to make sure the North is functioning on all cylinders and really bringing benefit to our communities. And it's that we need to keep at the forefront. This isn't just about educational programs for the sake of it. This is about delivering for our young people, for our communities, to sustain older generations as well. So incredibly important agenda, and I wish you all very well in the discussions you have today.
So, yeah, thank you to Judith. I think another round of applause for her. You know, again, I think both from Jim and Judith, who for me are a great double act because they are so passionate about and champions of the North. And it's absolutely great that we do have two champions in the House of Lords for the North. We need more of them, and that voice across the North needs to really be more joined up. As Jim says, we will have Tracy Brabin, Steve Rotherham, and Andy Burnham. I've said that one, haven't I? Anyway, all three, Tracy, Steve, and Andy, looking at the bridge, how we bridge the generation gap later on. So now, for our first panel, I'm going to call up Sue Ferns, who is the president of the TUC. If you come up here. We've got Emma Degg, the Chief Executive of the Northwest Business Leaders team. We've got Professor Jim Coleman, Director of Economics at WSP. And can I just thank you personally for sponsoring and supporting the conference today, without which it would not be possible. So very big welcome to Jim, who's got a very fancy title, which is Director of Economics. So we're in good company. And of course, a very good stalwart and friend of mine, Tony Wilson, not the Tony Wilson of the place, but he is, we met a while back on this agenda when he was at the Learn and Works Institute. So we're fellow passengers on the debate. Also, so he's now from the Institute of Employment Studies, and I'd say, well, he doesn't know about the labour market. You can't write that down on a postage stamp. So there we are. This is our illustrious panel. If you just bear with me, I'll just tiptoe through the tulips and come into my question time chair. So to kick off, I mean, the question that we are looking at really in this session is how far do you think, and bearing in mind what Judith and Jim have said, how far do you think that prosperity will be shared, and how far will levelling up go towards removing regional disparities and therefore regional inequalities in the towns, cities and communities across the North? Now, that is a very big exam question, and you will all have your perspective. But I think, you know, just listening to Judith and Jim, that word potential keeps coming out. But we also know is how do we actually bridge that gap and deliver that growth that actually we need to do that. I'm absolutely delighted for you to kick off, Sue, because you know, again, from the trade union movement, again, we live in interesting times, and later on we'll be talking about good work and what good jobs actually look like. But just give me your thoughts and kick off on what your key ideas on the question.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I have to say I'm not as positive about the levelling up white paper as Jim was. Perhaps not surprisingly, I believe trade union movement believes that to level up Britain, you've got to level up work. And what does that mean? It means having good jobs in the right places. And I think unions have a key role to play in that, and we should be seen as partners in the process of achieving that. And I think it's not just us that think that. TUC's done some polling, and that indicates that people across Britain want more and better jobs. And that actually is the focus of the TUC demonstration that will take place this Saturday. But Jill, you talked about bridging the gap. So I want to talk about two aspects of that. First one is about addressing the inequalities that exist in the labour market, which are crucial for the levelling up agenda. And I think, you know, government has a key role to play here. We were promised an employment bill to address some of the worst aspects of the labour market at the moment. We weren't just promised it once, we were promised it over and over again, and we haven't got it. But despite that, it doesn't remove the need for action to tackle low pay, insecure jobs, and abuses like fire and rehire. And we've seen that very recently with P&O, but that is not the only example that's taken place. And we do need action to address that. And I would argue that that would disproportionately benefit workers in the north, but clearly it would benefit all working people. And Jill, you also talked about the social care sector, and that's a key issue that does need to be addressed. I think, you know, we could do with some fair work agreements in that sector. We need a real living wage, and we need decent pay rises for people, whether they're employed directly in the public sector or in actually, you know, these were key workers. We were calling them key workers. We need to treat them with respect as key workers. So pay is an important part of this, an important part of good work. It's not the only aspect of it. So all that needs to happen as quickly as possible. But we need a longer term strategy as well, don't we? To ensure that the North plays its part, contributes to future prosperity in the way that we know it can. And the only way we're going to do that is by having a proper industrial strategy. We've had industrial strategy papers from government, but I would argue that we haven't got an industrial strategy. So the TUC's put forward some specific proposals, for example, for an 85 billion investment programme in green tech, energy and transport, and TUC analysis suggests that will create 1.25 million good green unionised jobs. Investment should clearly be prioritised for regions that need it most. And if we look at the north, for example, we've got a lot of energy related industries. Some of it's renewable energy, but we've still got a lot of energy intensive jobs. And so we need to focus on that. Manufacturing jobs are an important part of this picture as well. And actually, if we don't get the right industrial strategy, we will lose out in terms of manufacturing and supply chain jobs. Particularly, for example, if you look at the net zero economy, we look at renewable energy, which we strongly support. What we don't support is the fact that so much of the materials, components, technology is being imported. We want to see more of those good green jobs being located in the north. Just transition, that's the phrase, isn't it? We talk about just transition. I'm actually quite fed up with talking about just transition. I want to make it happen. And I want to, so the workers who will be affected by the transition to net zero don't talk about just transition. They talk about their futures, the importance of a fair process of change, which might mean a bit of reskilling or upskilling and support for people to do that. And that's what we need to be doing now, not just talking about it, but actually putting it into practice. And I think, you know, you've talked about those three mayors, they're doing some good work, working with trade unions. We need to see that happening, all stakeholders around the table and taking that forward. So I've probably said enough by way of introduction, but I just want to emphasise that unions and the TUC should be seen as partners in this journey that we all desperately need to go on, and we want to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. And I think it's that debate around what good work actually looks like post-pandemic, because the way we work, live, rest and play has changed, as pointed out by Jim O'Neill, and some of it is good. I think, you know, I quite like not coming into Manchester, I'm sorry for all these people, but, you know, on a Monday morning, and actually I'm more productive at home. We've all got our own experience, but I think it's the big thing I think that we really need to think about is that skills gap versus, you know, the huge jobs, so many job vacancies. That's the word I was replacing. So many job vacancies, but not necessarily the right pays. And I think, you know, again, how do we get business to take on board what good work is? Retention of staff is a real big issue. Getting the skills that you need to do the jobs for the next generation, or we don't actually know the kind of jobs that we will be needing to actually deliver things like the green economy. So mean, thanks for that sort of starter there, Sue, and I think it's really good that you've done that. I'm going to turn now to Emma, who is not quite firing on all cylinders, or just on one ear today. So from the Northwest Business Leadership Team, and Emma again is a huge champion of not just the Northwest, I'm going to say that, but you know, the business voice, I think, across the North and the Northern Powerhouse. So really pleased that you can be here today. But again, just give us your thoughts, Emma, on the big question.
Thank you very much, Jill. And I think I'd like to start off by saying that I agree with absolutely everything that Sue just said. But I think that's quite an important point. There is no way through any of this if employers, trade unions, government, community groups, local authorities are not working together, and we know that. And there is nothing new under the sun, actually, as Jim and I were saying before this started. Judith and I sit alongside each other on the UK 2070 Commission, and that was set up 3 years ago now. And the reason 2070 was picked was because of a recognition that if you're really going to do something transformative around fairness and equality and sharing prosperity, it is going to take that long. Now, that's not to say you don't do those immediate things too, but there is a real risk, I think, at the moment that because of Brexit, COVID, Ukraine, what's going to be coming next down the track, that we do get pulled too much into what is urgent and away from what is important. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but while in some ways everything's changed, the solutions haven't, and we know this, right? We've been around a while. It's probably why I've gone deaf in one ear, to be honest. The solutions have always been dealing with infrastructure investment alongside skills, alongside housing, alongside education, working alongside the private sector and doing that in place. We know that what we need as a business community is stable, long-term national policy with local delivery, because we know that's what works best. And there's example after example of government designing a national programme that fails completely to have recognised how that's actually going to be implemented on the ground. Right? So my comment about levelling up is that I've never been a fan of the phrase at all, because it is a clever political brand in the same way as the big society or the third way or anything else are, and they go out of fashion. We need things to be done in this parliament. We need to be feeding our children. We need to be dealing with the cost of living. We need to be helping businesses to recover properly from COVID, and Brexit is having a massive impact at the moment. But that cannot be at the expense of those long-term issues. To my shame, I went to Bradford for the first time a couple of weeks ago with Business in the Community in the NatWest Commission, and I was just incredibly struck by the quality of leadership, by the people that you met, by how the community felt. It was just, you know, sometimes you go on a visit and you just get a real buzz of pure oxygen. And it really, I have to confess, underlined for me the madness of the decisions around Northern Powerhouse Rail and our connectivity. And so for me, again, as a business community, what we are saying to government is, we want local places empowered. Yes, we want devolution, but actually we want you to recognise that just in the Northwest, we have 9,000 businesses here who export to countries outside the EU. You don't get a global Britain, you don't get a successful economy, you don't do anything unless you do that with us, and that means you sticking to your promises. Inequality is not just wrong, it is a waste of money, and it is a hindrance to business. And so thank you again, Jill, for all that you do actually, year in, year out, in trying to keep us to some of those long-term commitments.
Wow, that's lovely, thank you. No, I think that word about optimism is going to keep bobbing up, really. So I'm glad that there's a consensus breaking out across the panel. But you know, thanks to you know, the thoughts. I'm surprised you've not been to Bradford, but you know, your secret's
Let's go
out.
again.
No, it's great, and obviously the being the capital of culture is a great thing, and I think we should, you know, I'm a big champion of Northern culture, which is one of the reasons we're here as well. But you know, culture also drives the economy, and I think you know, we see how important that is over the pandemic, where we've been deprived of a lot of that. Anyway, I'm digressing. So we've got Jim, professor as well. So I'm in awe of your what you're going to say. And again, you know, just answer the question as well you can in terms of you know, that prosperity gap and the economic gap that we face.
Okay, thank you, Jill. It's interesting the way the question is framed about prosperity being shared. I think it raises a question about what do we mean by prosperity. I think Sue's absolutely right. It's about your form of employment, the income you generate, having a living wage, having an income that gives you the possibility of a certain quality of life, and to be able to make choices. But it's also about how far we can progress. It's not just getting a job. We have an economy that's full of jobs. We've never had so many jobs in our economy. Lots and lots of jobs, but they're not all good jobs, or they're not all jobs which provide a progression route so that we can improve. And I think the other problem is that not all people can make choices. Some people can only make a particular choice to access a particular type of job, and it's not going to let them progress. I think so. We need to kind of understand what prosperity is, and I think the Northern Powerhouse, the North, needs to prosper on its own terms and in its own way, and through its own form of specialization and sharing. On levelling up, I think I agree with Emma and Sue. The problem that levelling up is trying to address is not a new problem. It's an embedded problem that we've been dealing with for decades, certainly since the 1970s, I think, when the economy deindustrialized. And we had decades of EU structural funds. I worked on all sorts of programming with EU structural funds and evaluating them and all sorts of things. So we just have a new name for the same problem. There are some differences now in how we might be able to deal with it. And I think one is the whole agenda around net zero. The way our economy evolves will be driven in large part by how we respond to climate change and the need to achieve a net zero position by 2050. Now that creates a lot of jobs, creates the need for upskilling across many industries. It creates a need to transition, and the transition process is very important, as Sue has said. I think it's a little bit difficult at the moment because we don't know exactly what the pathway to net zero looks like. We know some things about it. We don't have maybe sufficient policy certainty in order to be able to predict and plan exactly in terms of skills development, education, etc. But we do know some of it. We know we need to retrofit all of our houses. We know that. We can work out how many jobs that's going to create. We can work out the skills needed in the next 5 to 10 years and start quantifying that and start programming to get people into those types of roles and get people to transition across. And I know the education sector is working on that already. There's already a lot of work on progress. There are specializations in the North, whether it's offshore wind, whether it's the emerging hydrogen economy that we know will grow. We can develop more. We can face internationally competitive business and specialization on these things. But it needs to be planned, and of course it needs to be funded. I think one of the critical elements here is the role, particularly of the further education sector, which is a sector that probably trains most of the people most of the time, and is going to be absolutely fundamental to this whole process of transitioning people across industries, from industries where the jobs are maybe being removed to industries where the jobs are being created. People of all ages, from all backgrounds, all sorts of socioeconomic characteristics need to be pulled into that process. And I think it's the FE sector and the school sector that's going to do a lot of that. HE, of course, it's creating very high level skills, and it's creating all the R&D opportunities that get spun out into new businesses, of course, but the FE sector is fundamental. So I think for the North to prosper, I think all of the partners who are involved in this, all the stakeholders, need to, we all need to keep, there's work being done already, of course, but continue working on this agenda and almost speaking with one voice and creating the northern investment proposition for that. I think that's vitally important. The other thing, of course, is devolution. This is when I was working in economic development in the north of the country 25 years ago. We didn't have evolved sub-regional economies. This is also new. It needs to go further. There needs to be more control over things like the skills agenda. Of course, I think it's also, Jim O'Neill said we need to, more areas need to benefit from this. We need to have more devolved entities across the north. I think that's correct. But we must not go into our own individual little sub-regional place and try to do this on our own. It needs to be almost systematized. The Northern Powerhouse needs to speak with one voice to government and not let government set the levelling up agenda for it. The North must dictate what the levelling up agenda is. Don't let it happen, can shape it. And of course, that's the mayors are trying to do that, but it needs to keep going, keep speaking with one voice. When I work across the world on economic development projects, the one thing I see where I see success, where prosperity is generated, where it's shared, where places become more competitive, what I also see always are municipal authorities with a lot of capacity and a lot of capability and enough people in them to do the work of generating an environment where the private sector can prosper. I think in the period of austerity, a lot of capacity was taken out of local authorities and it was never put back. It was put back into central government, but not into local government. I do a lot of work on housing, trying to get housing delivered. One of the big problems is local authorities do not have enough capability to work with the private sector to deliver housing. So unless that capacity is put back in, I think we're going to struggle with a lot of this. The other really obvious thing that I think needs to happen in the north, and Emma's already talked about it, and others, is the connectivity piece. I think, of course, connecting the cities, connecting the towns. We know that's problematic. We know there's a lot more to do in terms of lobbying. The reality is, even if the government goes crazy today and agrees, let's have HS2 to Leeds, let's have a fast link Bradford to Manchester. I'm doing a big project in Bradford right now. And even if they said that today, it's still 10 to 15 years away. And in that 10 to 15 years, we still need to train a workforce that is capable of decarbonising built environment, transport, heavy industry, energy. Still needs to be done. We still need to work within that very constrained environment, even if the policy changes. But I think by combining resource and speaking with one voice and continuing to think really in a very strategic way across the Northern Powerhouse, I think a lot of this could be possible.
That's fantastic, Jim. I think, again, I think that whole thing around transition, you mentioned Sue as well, how do you make that happen, in a cost of living crisis? And there are other agendas which are part of the solution, whether it's insulating your home or whatever, that we don't have the skills to do that. And businesses, I'm sure you picked this up as well, Emma, that businesses are saying, well, hold on a minute, I'm not going to go as fast as I was. I'm not going to take that risk just now. I was going to make my business net zero. I'm going to do that. But and for individuals, it's the supply chain and other things that are making things not accelerate, but actually sort of slow down. Emma, you're sort of maybe not. I mean, I think there's a huge commitment, but I think it's that whole thing of how do you actually get that acceleration and scaling up that's needed to make that transition and make it affordable. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly do that.
I think it's complicated. I think there's an opportunity. The energy pricing at the moment is a huge threat. There is also an opportunity. Actually, part of transition is becoming more efficient. Is about becoming more efficient, right? So I think it's complex, and businesses are many and varied, and are not a homogeneous mass really. So I think it's about the language that we use sometimes to persuade businesses to engage in that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do there. I also think the word capacity that you used, Jim, is really an important one. When we think about anything, and we do have to. I mean, I've just been talking about Brexit and pandemic, but you're right. Don't forget the period of austerity. And when you're listening to Eddie from the RMT this morning, he's talking about this whole situation where people haven't had a pay increase and all of those things. But I don't want to get into the RMT structure at all, because But the point being is that people haven't had, have felt that things have been taken away from them. And then at the same time, we've got a government saying, oh yeah, but we're going to put this all back in. And then we also actually sort of feel that there's going to be probably little pockets of success. And we saw that with the integrated rail plan as well, because certain places did get, we didn't get, the North didn't get the big plan. And as you say, even if we started tomorrow, it's not, we're behind the curve, we're not leading the curve. And at the same time, we've got this huge potential to really drive certainly the net zero agenda with great ambitions as well there. So I'm now going to just, I think I'm getting quite excited because I think we've got lots of things going on, but I'm going to go to you, Tony, now, because I know I call you a bit of a guru, but so don't let me down. The point being that what I want you to do is really sort of like absorb some of that, be a bit thought-provoking, but also do that thing where you talk about, where the gaps are in the labour market.
I will try. I'll try not to let you down, Jill. Thanks for thanks for having me. And it's great. It's great that we're all back together. It feels like, it has been too long. So it's good to see friends and familiar faces again too. What struck me listening to Sue, to Emma, and to Jim is these sorts of challenges and the issues, the opportunities too, but the challenges and the issues we've been talking about around, how do we make work better? How do we reduce inequalities in the labour market? How do we support good growth? How do we improve opportunities for progression? How do we collaborate and work better? How do we invest in building capacity and capability in areas? Quite apart from the Jim O'Neill agenda, and I totally agree with what Jim was saying, but the big kind of, power broking in central government, how do we actually do these things locally? These are the issues that you have been grappling with for years. Like, these are the last couple of years has changed a lot. It's catalyzed and it's accelerated changes. These are fundamentally the same sorts of problems we were facing 2, 3 and more years ago. And I think what worries me a bit is that where the government investment has gone over the last couple of years has been preparing for a very different crisis, a crisis that we haven't had. Like 2 years ago, if we were speaking 2 years ago, we were still in a full lockdown. We were on the cusp of what we thought would be 4 million people unemployed. Unemployment that we had not seen, ravaging communities we hadn't seen since the 1980s. And right now we would be dealing with a crisis of long-term unemployment. How do we help those people who lost their jobs then get back to work? The crises we're seeing now, actually, thankfully, we avoided that. Yes, because of job retention scheme, investment, but also because of all the work of people in this room and in rooms and in organisations like that across the country, and employers and families and households adapting and changing and trying to sort of work through it and navigate through it. You've got the lowest unemployment now, more or less, since the 70s. So I think the three, I'll be really brief, but the three challenges I think we're facing now are sort of 3 Ps around participation, they're around pay, and around productivity. And they're same but different to where we were a few years ago. Participation is one that is the biggest difference. There's about 1 million, we think there's 1 million people missing from the labour force compared to the pre-pandemic trend. We have reversed a long run growth in the labour force that's gone back to the 1990s, and it's reversed partly because of population and Brexit and so on, but mainly, overwhelmingly, because of higher economic inactivity. Horrible phrase, higher economic inactivity, people not in work and not looking for work. Predominantly older people who've left the labour force, they've retired, drawing down job retention scheme, income support, self-employed income support, pension savings, redundancy payments and so on, many of whom won't come back, but also significant growth in long-term ill health, worklessness due to long-term ill health. Some of that may be long COVID. I think actually probably most of it is people with pre-existing conditions waiting for treatment, or whose mental health has got worse, or who are worried about going back to work, or who employers have let go because of the pandemic. So that participation crisis is affecting all of us. I'll come back to how it's affecting us in the North, sort of far worse. On pay, this is a story of inflation. Like, with inflation rising beyond 10% in the next few months, pay will never keep up. We will not be able to counteract the hit to our living standards through pay alone. But at the same time, it doesn't need to be as bad as it is. It was the largest falls in real terms pay that we've seen in at least 2 decades in the data that was released just 2 days ago. The third problem then around productivity is linked to the one about pay, actually, because behind that inflation story, nominal pay growth, cash terms pay growth, is rising by about 4% year on year. Now, that's pretty high by historic standards,
It's great. It's great if you've got a growing economy and you've got rising productivity. We don't. You know, we've got a flat economy and we've got weak productivity growth. And what the bank and the Treasury and everyone else is worried about is you've got 4% nominal pay growth, 1.5% productivity growth, 0% economic growth. You know, that suggests higher prices, that suggests inflationary spirals and so on. So, you know, that's the wage price spiral the bank's worried about. It's not one about industrial action, although I'm sure they're worried about that too. It's mainly one about people moving jobs, better pay, firms having to offer more, and not finding those gains in productivity. I think in the north, this is affecting us. You know, we've done work around this tight labour market and for the local government association, some of these differences across the country. You know, for all the places where there's more vacancies and unemployed, there's plenty of places where that isn't the case. And the places where we still have low participation, we still have high unemployment, we still have weak vacancies are the same areas before the pandemic. They're ex-industrial areas, they're often coastal areas, they're inner city areas, and they're often, more often than not, in the northern part of the country, rather than sort of southern and southeast country. So, you know, here in Manchester or in Leeds or in Newcastle, there's more vacancies than there are unemployed people, often significantly more. But you go to Oldham, you go to Bradford, you go to north of Tyneside, you've got 3 or 4 in each of those places, 3 or 4 unemployed people chasing every vacancy. You know, so how do we address that? It's about transport, absolutely. It's about skills. It's about how we can better help people access those jobs. But these are really fundamental problems that we're facing. This is not always a pretty picture about a growing economy, and well, it's not a growing economy, but about a tight labour market and higher vacancies. There's a lot more we can do. Now, I'm an optimist at heart. I really am honest. So I would just say, I think there are things we can be like optimistic about. And I think largely it comes down to kind of appetite and desire to do something about this. I mean, the social, what I think we've all felt is a social and economic case to reduce inequality. I won't use the term levelling up either. To reduce inequalities, to narrow gaps, to support growth. That's a business case now. It's a stronger business case, a stronger business imperative than it's ever been. And it's just great hearing Emma and hearing others, hearing business leaders up and down the country saying, what can we do? We want to do more. Jim mentioned it too. Jim O mentioned it too. Those are the benefits of flexible working, more inclusive recruitment, more job security. You know, these are things that employers are investing in. I'm not going to be panglossy, and it's not happening in all parts of the economy, but these are things that employers are trying to do more of, and we can work better with employers. We must work better with employers to try to help them do that, think differently about how they recruit, how they support people in work, how they support economic growth, and how we support economic and social inclusion. But the other point is, I think that, you know, with the powers that we've got, the increasing powers that we've got locally, and the appetite locally to do more, I think there are opportunities for us to work better together, whether that's through adult education budget, devolved AEB, whether that's through city deals and gain share arrangements, whether that's through local partnerships. You know, there's more we can do. And the final point is, this is more for central government. The money's there. That unemployment crisis we prepared for, £10 billion. Government committed through the Plan for Jobs and the Spending Review in active labour market policies and skills support to tackle unemployment. At least £2 billion of that money has gone back to Treasury because unemployment's been lower. Well, you know, as I was saying to the Treasury just this morning before I came here, you know, can we have that back, please? Can we spend some of it, some of the money that wasn't spent on Kickstart, on Restart, in Job Centre Plus? Imagine if we had £2 billion we could invest in support for people with health conditions, for older people, for people outside the labour force who aren't currently looking for work. I'm not talking about telling people to come to job centres and look for a job. I'm talking about going where the people are and saying, we'll help you, so we'll improve your well-being, try to tackle loneliness, try to help you to take part again. And while we're talking about that, we talk about what jobs might be available, what help might, you know, how we can help you to start to take steps back to work. And of course, support employers and invest in the skills and support people need to work. There's massive opportunities here too, but challenge. Wow, you know, a lot of challenges. A tough time to be out of work. I still think, and it's a tough time for many of us in work as well. You know, with the cost of living crisis that we're all facing. Ends on a bad note. I meant to end on a happy note. I'm sorry.
No, I'm quite happy now because I think we should have a campaign to get the money back. Yeah, well, we could do that. Coined at the Northern Powerhouse Education Employment Skills Summit 2022. Very interesting. I told you it was good, and really thought-provoking stuff. I think, Emma, I think you were going to come back there because on some of that.
Yeah, Tony, can you be my guru as well, please? That would be lovely. Good luck getting any money back out of the Treasury. Yeah. We've been trying and failing around the apprenticeship level for some time, really. So there were two things for me really. The first is we shouldn't just be arguing this on the basis of unemployment again and social justice. We should be arguing this on the basis of this is now hampering growth.
Yeah.
The number one topic on all of my members, and they're the big employers across every sector, across pretty much every category, is labour shortages.
Yeah,
you're quite right that that is patchy, but this is actually going to hinder the recovery, and that's the reason to keep the money there actually. And employers want to do that. And the only other alternative is something around immigration policy. Well, if you don't want to do that, you're going to have to fund as doing it for people who are furthest away from the labour market. The other thing I just wanted to say very quickly is about net zero skills, and it's because of a captive audience of skills people here. And I can see Nick Goldspink here from N8, who's one of the people who's working with us on this. I think it's really important that we don't end up with this idea that we don't know what those jobs are, because we do know what quite a lot of them are actually, and we do know what the skills are. And there's a fundamental translation problem between employers and the skills system. Because you say to us, what green skills do you need over the next 20 years? And we say, we don't know. Actually, we do. We just talk in the wrong language. We need the same skills as before, but we need every employee to have an understanding around sustainability, around the green economy, around having the right moral compass and those things. So some of that we can do now without anything from government, and we can do that in place and be educating those people and giving aspiration to our kids about those jobs are already there.
Yeah. Jim, just quickly, I'm going to go back to Sue, and then we're going to open it up because I want to hear from you as well. But I mean, just in terms of the 3 Ps, and also what Emma said, it's like, you know, what's I think so frustrating is that we sort of know what needs to be done, as Emma was sort of saying, but this gap and the language, I think it's really important moving forward, because I think that going back to that thing, we do need to be saying that we do have potential's got to be an opportunity. Potential's got to actually be realised, and I think you know, that's not the state we are in at the moment. There's a lot. Yeah, I sort of gone.
No, I think there's a lot in that. I think I agree with everything that Tony was saying. I think one of the problems we have sometimes is that you know, I'm an employer, WSP is an employer, and we're saying to the education sector, you're not giving us the young people with all the skills that we need. And the education sector saying to us, you're not telling us what young people you want us to produce for you. So we get this slight kind of impasse sometimes, which is partly a communication thing. It's partly just having kind of more and better dialogue. I think addressing the skills needs of net zero is impossible without really close collaboration between employers and skills and training providers. On the participation point, I think one of the mistakes we should not repeat is an assumption that if the economy improves, things pick up, lots of jobs are created through decarbonisation and net zero, everybody will get picked up and pulled along with it, because as Tony said, we've got embedded inactivity and lack of participation in the same areas that we've always had it. And one thing I always say is that the easiest way to get a job is to already have a job.
Yeah.
You'll get another job. If you haven't had a job ever,
The access level.
yeah, or you've been inactive for a long time, it's extremely important. And where I've worked on programs which are about participation and activity, to some extent, the only way around it is very, very resource intensive, working in communities and helping people access the labour market. We're going to have a lot of issues, I think, about the just transition, which is getting people who are maybe older in their careers, more progressed in their careers, maybe they've been inactive for a long time, to go into new types of jobs, new types of industries which have not been there before. So that it's not just getting people into the labour market, it's getting them into a kind of working experience that is quite new for everyone, I think. And it might be hybrid, it might not, it might be about a decarbonisation skill, it might not, but there's a lot in that, I think. And that it would be great to get some of that 10 million, because I think we need it for quite resource intensive working in communities, I think, because we don't do that. People don't just naturally get picked up.
You've really got to drive it right down to those pockets or areas which are, you know, where the disparities are so obvious. Sue, come on in. What's your take?
I want to make 3 quick points if I can. In terms of opportunities, you look at the sectors we're talking about, particularly in terms of net zero and the demand for skills, there is a huge opportunity to diversify that workforce. We are still, for a large part, talking about white male workforces. Those aren't our communities, and there's a huge opportunity to diversify. Everybody talks about it, but where's the real plan and drive to make that happen? I think huge opportunity, but we all need to really get behind that. Secondly, in terms of green skills, I think it's really difficult to talk about green skills. I think we have to unpack that, because in some cases it's new jobs, green jobs contributing directly to net zero. There's a lot more where people are doing work in a certain way and could do it greener in the future. So I think we've really got to unpack that. And I would say green does not necessarily equal good jobs. It should do, and we should all work to make that the case. But don't assume that green and good work, good skills, good jobs are necessarily interchangeable. That needs some real effort to make sure that these are good quality jobs. And finally, just to agree with your point, we need to do this now. So we need to think about people and the skills of people coming into the labour market, but we also need to think urgently about those who are already in the labour market. And actually, I think in some cases, speaking from the experience in my own union, some of the barriers to transition are not as great as people perceive them to be. And we need to help people with that. And actually, sometimes I think employers could do a bit more just by thinking about the way that they describe jobs and skills. Sometimes I know from my members, they look at job specs and they think they haven't got the skills, but it's the way that everybody uses language. So, you know, there's, I think, some relatively straightforward things that we could do, you know, not a silver bullet, but that could help as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think what we need to do now is listen to, on the point around participation, I want some audience participation. And just to refresh people, we will be looking at good work later on, and also the green skills agenda. So the whole thing of education, the next session is very much on education and skills. So I know somebody's looking for a question. Oh, there we are. So come on. So I am going to go. The person who was first, which is the man here, with the glasses on his head. They're not mine, are they? It's fine.
I can speak loudly anyway. So, morning. I'm Richard Bonner. I'm a director of Arcadis in the organisation WSP, but I'm also part of the Northern Powerhouse board. And I'm really interested in a whole series of points that I think are interwoven. The issue of immigration that we were talking about is really interesting, because we see very high levels of immigration in the world of science, innovation and technology, but we have lost that usual immigration post-Brexit in the sense of low-skilled economy workers. The issue of transition on productivity, I think, is how we can link some of those ambitions by trying to invest in standardization and automation in jobs that already exist, but where we can drive some of that routine activity so that we are taking some of that low-skilled effort out of the economy. There we are, we're back in. Thank you.
We did hear you, by the way. But, yeah.
try and speak loudly. And so linking those issues up, to your point, Sue, around an industrial strategy, I wonder how joined up we are actually on the whole journey to changing the way industry works. And an example I was chatting to an organisation recently is about vertical farming. You know, we're reading in the papers around so much produce being left in the fields, but actually can we automate quickly? And I wonder how the panel feel about joining up those big constructs around the whole transition on automation to improve productivity, the skills agenda, and how we accelerate our industrial strategy to more clearly give us the routes to getting the outcomes we need from the skills that are available.
Okay, and I think I might just take three, because and I know the lady next to you is there, so might on productivity levels, I think you should go there. Yeah.
So I'm Anne Gornell, I'm co-chair of the Northern Skills Network. Hello, everybody. And the Northern Skills Network has approximately 300 training providers of all kinds included in it. So my question is to Professor Coleman. It was it was great to hear recognition of the FE sector and the role it could play. It does play a role currently, but could be put into pole position, I think. How do you think that could happen, and what would be the impact of realising that potential?
And can I have one more question? Oh, well, let's, all right. Is it, I hope it's not the same question.
It's not the same.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, all that, that row has been done now. Okay.
Hi, yeah, I'm Alex Miles. I'm the Managing Director of Yorkshire Learning Providers and the other co-chair of the Northern Skills Network. Again, just want to say great to hear Professor Coleman acknowledge the FE sector. The FE sector doesn't get acknowledged as being critical. In a lot of instances, more of a mop-up sector, so that's great. What I would like to ask the panel is twofold. One, I would have liked to have heard more about how apprenticeships can play a part in promoting levelling up, or particularly social mobility. Today is Social Mobility Awareness Day, so I'd like to get the panel's thoughts on how you think apprenticeships can really be critical ally to the question and social mobility and levelling up for towns, cities and communities. I don't think that they've got the accolade that they deserve, and I think that's more that we all need to do across the north and within our towns, cities and communities. And then the other part is on the green skills. I'm currently champion green and sustainable development within apprenticeships, and how we can use apprentices to be the key driver in supporting employers in their green and digitisation strategy. Again, your thoughts on how we can use apprenticeships to drive that forward. But also, Emma, I'm hosting a Northern Green and Sustainable Development Conference in September. So it's a bit of a, can you come along and talk about the wonderful things you just said about, because the challenge I'm getting is, if the FE sector doesn't deliver in retrofit or EV or, you know, this underground source pumps, whatever they're called, they don't necessarily respond. And what I'm trying to say is we need to have this conversation now. We can't wait for government. We can't wait for funding. And actually green sits in every sector and every type of business. So that you really hit home on that. So if you can come and be a guest speaker, I'll come.
We are going to talk a lot about skills and education in the next bit, but that you had, I think there's a couple of questions. I think the immigration one, maybe I'm looking at you, Emma, maybe to answer, but all do chip in, all of you. I'm going to take those through because I'm conscious of the time, and I know there's lots more we can talk about, but let's just come back on the immigration, then we'll go. You had a dedicated question, so you'll have to try and answer that one. And I think actually with Tony and Sue, they're all really good questions. So well done, whichever row that is. Yeah. Okay,
really
Emma.
quick then, bullet points, and yes, if I can. Richard's point around tech, absolutely. But we can integrate that with just transition as well. So just a really quick example, and it relates to the apprenticeship point too. So a project called Glass Futures, brilliant around transforming the foundation industries, got made smarter at the heart of that as well. And it's working along with an organisation that we helped to establish called Net Zero Northwest. Yeah. Foundation industries that move to better technical adoption, better monitoring, are more efficient, save energy costs, digitise, but also can upskill existing operatives who've been doing dirty, boring, repetitive jobs to actually do that monitoring and actually have the associated pay rises. And we've got really good examples of that, but it needs that really tight working in place. And the other very quick one, which again is a bit of an advert that I promised, we have all sorts of issues in terms of skills shortages. One is around really high skilled R&D postgrads that we used to be getting in much larger numbers from Europe. There's a brilliant project called Prosper that's being run out of Liverpool, Manchester, Lancaster, and is about to spread across the north and across the rest of the UK. And that's alternative routes into employment other than going into academia and having tenure and so on. So But again, that's about local design. So we can do it, and none of those things need government permission to do it, or further devolution. If, Jim's point, if we get the relationships right, we can make a real difference.
Great, Jim.
Well, that's an exam question I've got to answer. So what did we do here? I think more money helps, of course. I think the sector's underfunded, but let's come back to that. I think what I think might be a little bit missing at the moment is what I don't see prominently enough at central government level is a single cohesive voice of the FE sector telling government that our sector is going to train all those people who need to fit heat pumps. They will not be educated by Oxford and Cambridge. They will be educated by Keighley College, which I happen to be going to tomorrow, which is why I use that one. But this is the reality. It's these institutions that will train the heat pump installers or get people who are currently fitting gas boilers to transition, this whole transition thing. And I don't think that voice is clear enough or articulated strongly enough to central government. Central government hears from universities all the time, and so it should, but it's not hearing this kind of single voice from that sector. And I think that's part of the answer. And I think it's also part of the answer about how to get more funding into the sector, I think. So there's a kind of maybe a strategic articulation of the role, this key role, this fundamental role. I think you mentioned apprenticeships. I think apprenticeships are part of the answer. And I don't think most employers don't understand, for example, how degree level apprenticeships work, or the fact that they're paying for them already and can benefit from them. And it's again, this is not. There's a whole parity with steam problem that we've never solved as well. Germany doesn't have that problem, which is why Germany is still, despite a few problems, a manufacturing powerhouse. So I think there's more to do in terms of thinking strategically about how we place the apprenticeship as a core part of this whole effort to decarbonize our economy, and the role that the FE sector will play, and to make that message strong, and just keep repeating it until the government gives up and says, okay, here's the money, here's part of that 10 million that we're going to spend. I think it's sometimes kind of quite straightforward things like that everybody forget, because everybody's so tied up in the day-to-day. Because of the pressures of the day-to-day, there's not, again, it's capacity, having enough capacity to stand above that and articulate.
And I think it also comes back to this point around sort of the capacity that we have locally to do this. And when we were talking about that earlier, I think you may be mentioning it, Emma. I had in mind like Cleveland in the US, which has had an incredible transformation from being a very industrial area in decline to one that's really on the leading edge now with growth, and a very livable city, and so much that they've done well. But at the heart of it is really, really strong local partnerships, municipal capacity and capability, the right sorts of devolution. It's not the kind of the big power broker stuff. It's about having the operational autonomy to join things up. And it links back to the FE point, because I think I feel like that sector, a lot of policy in that space has been characterized by constant change in policy and direction, real insecurity in the sector too, and the points that Jim's made around esteem and parity of esteem and so on. And I worry that we are still making lots and lots of changes to policy. We're still not really settled on what it is that we actually want to do and how we can have a more coherent, more systematic approach. My worry with apprenticeships, so I think on apprenticeships, there are really practical things we can do, particularly around getting large employers to give their levy money away, to try and use that, as many are now doing, a number are now doing, and to try to extend that access to training to more people. There's more we can do around working better with smaller employers. There's a lot more that local areas, city regions in particular, are doing around trying to take the lead on that and really grab it, and that's fantastic. And I think we will be talking more about that later today. So there's clearly a lot we can do, but I do worry we've got a bit of a Model T Ford problem around adult skills, where you can have any training you want if you're an employer, as long as it's an apprenticeship. And for a lot of employers right now, they will not commit to creating 1 year or 2 year jobs with training and commit to the off-the-job requirements of apprenticeships. So we've got to also think about how can we make training, access to training, more flexible, more responsive, recognize that there are risks of unintended consequences of firms substituting training they may have done for government funded or co-funded training, but also recognize the reality that investment in training is plummeting, and we really need to invest in this to help to support those transitions into work. and they're really doable. As Sue said, people do move jobs all the time, and as the labour market tightens, firms will recognise that and they'll change their recruitment practices. And this partly comes back to the productivity point too. How do we sort of square some of that circle? My concern there is that we don't talk well enough to firms. It's not really for government to tell firms how to run their businesses better, but we don't invest enough in supporting firms to do the things that would drive those sorts of improvements. And we don't talk to workers who are in work about how to find a better job. Those are fundamental system failures. Our public employment service is a claimant conditionality service for about 1 million people who are claiming the right bit of universal credit. And on the business side, I tell you now, help to grow management and LEP growth hubs and help to grow digital with the best will in the world are not going to lead to the transformation in business management practices that we need. So we do have to start thinking more creatively about how we can bring that together, work much better with firms on recruitment and retention and supporting work, and much better with people in work around how to find a better job.
Yeah, and finally, Sue, sorry.
All the experts have said lots of things which I agree with. So just a couple of points on apprenticeships. I think they do have an important role to play as part of a broader system. I think we mustn't, it's all about quality and the quality of training that's provided, whether it's an apprenticeship or not. Let's not confuse quality with level. We need high quality at every level, and that's really important. I agree with you, digitisation becomes more important. Again, I think that's an opportunity to diversify our apprenticeship intake, and I wish government would do more about that in terms of setting some targets or expectations around that. In terms of the point about the broader industrial revolution, if you like, automation and so on, I think it's right. We shouldn't talk about net zero and green skills as something separate from that broader change that's happening. But again, it's about how we manage that. There are different views about whether automation is going to lead to job losses or job gains. Who will lose? Who will gain from that? How do we govern that? What's the use of algorithms? The implications of how algorithms are set up. But I agree with you, it's all part of a wider debate that we all need to be part of.
And on that note, we're going to carry on debating. We've got an excellent session. We've got the Minister coming to tell us exactly on that point around skills, so get your questions ready. I'm absolutely delighted that...
Can we have our 10 minutes?
2 billion, it's 2 billion. 2 billion is the figure.
We want it now. Who's going to ask that question? Hey, come on. So we've got Anne Longfield, Commission on Young Lives and former Children's Commissioner for England. We're very much looking at bridging the gaps in education specifically, but the employment and skills that we've been talking to. So the debate goes on. I'm going to give you a toilet break, a very quick one, because we need to get cracking. I think it only really remains to thank our exceptional panel and to Judith and Jim in absentia, and to put your hands together and say, haven't they been great? Haven't they been wonderful? So thanks very much. Oh, and you've got to be back here